What does Assassin's Creed mean to you? I expect that this answer will be extremely different from person to person across literal generations of gamers whose first AC game was very different than the next person in line. I'm old, and that means I bought in at the original, and that became my benchmark for what an Assassin's Creed game should be, which I stand by being the correct measure for the series. But I cannot fault someone who bought in with Ezio and thought it should be a borderline cinematic adventure, or people who hopped into the shoes of Edward Kenway and Black Flag and came to expect a vast world to explore. People who bought in at Origins would likely think along the same lines. The thing I love about the series is that there's a little bit of something for everyone here. If you tell me what aspect of the genre you enjoy, I can probably point to the right Assassin's Creed game for you. Whether that be a strong narrative,
You know nothing of schemes. You're but a puppet.
something vast and exciting, something grindy,
You were right, my love. He was not the last one.
a bit middle of the road,
How did you find me? The apple you stole from Mario Auditore, let me...
or maybe even something else.
Norris is trying to court a woman. What do you women like in terms of gifts?
Here's the thing. When I think of Assassin's Creed, I will always think of a methodical, narrative-focused game that emphasizes its biggest strength in the greatness of its morality. In the best Assassin's Creed games, there was no black and white. There was a goal and different ways of getting to it, both having strengths and both having flaws. We've gotten so far away from that core concept that I wouldn't be surprised to see someone who was introduced in the newer entries surprised to hear me say that. I like a lot of Assassin's Creed games for different reasons, but enjoyment is enjoyment, and I think that's what really matters. I've made the argument previously that there are no bad games, and while I may hold some very strong personal opinions on some of the entries in the series, at the end of the day, I don't care if you find yourself in opposition to my opinion. If a game makes you happy, then I'm happy, even if that game sucks. That being said, I do think it's possible to hold the games within a franchise up to the yardstick they set for themselves and compare them, and in doing so question an entry's relevance to the series in which they are entitled to. Today we're going to look at entries from the original Assassin's Creed to the title that I think announced Ubisoft's departure from the core values of the series, although I think they started packing their bags much earlier. I don't intend to spoil anything ahead, but if something comes up, I'll warn you and provide timestamps so you can avoid them. Let's go on a little journey together talking about what the Assassin's Creed defined itself to be, where I think they left that behind, why that was a failure, and we'll talk about Mirage, which is labeled to be the return to what made many of us fans in the first place. It's labeled as Return to Roots. Also, at the end, we'll be giving out some awards to show off what games excelled in certain areas. You ready? Let's go.
You mentioned a creed before. What is it?
Nothing is true. Everything is permitted.
That is rather cynical.
It would be if it were doctrine, but it is merely an observation of the nature of reality. To say that nothing is true is to realize that the foundations of society are fragile, and that we must be the shepherds of our own civilization. To say that everything is permitted is to understand that we are the architects of our actions, and that we must live with their consequences.
This way.
Whether glorious or tragic.
So where do we start? I think right at the beginning by going back to look at what made Assassin's Creed so unique when it dropped. Stealth games were a pretty defined genre at this point, with first-person entries like the Thief series and third-person titles like Splinter Cell, which is another Ubisoft entry. Both of these had one defining trait. You were a member of the Shadows, and that's how you got past your enemies. The first entry in the Assassin's Creed series hadn't quite evolved social stealth to what it would be in the following titles, but it gave us a glimpse. Combining physical means of stealth like hiding in hay bales, rooftop things, and just avoiding line of sight, then we added to this with more overt hiding places like on benches and inside groups of scholars whose similar robes made for a mobile hiding place. This is a primitive entry to be sure, but the groundwork was here and it did some things incredibly well. For starters, it involved you in preparation for a mission in ways that it would take years to even begin to return to. Yes, the missions to get said information were repetitive and sometimes infuriating. However, the information you would get from these missions could range from minor to imperative in terms of actual assassination you would plan out, and the amount of information you chose to gather could drastically affect the outcome of any mission you were working on at the time. Gameplay found its evolution in the next title, but one thing that AC1 set a standard for that I don't think has ever been overtaken, maybe not even met in the series, is its narrative. It's extremely rare to see a game that exists with so much gray in the telling of its narrative. Spoilers for AC1 here for a bit, here's a timestamp to skip them. It picked our side for us to be sure, but the genius is that it leaves so much room to question the side we're on, and we will even find out in the end that blind faith in the assassins wasn't the right choice. Altair learns and grows with us. He was our protagonist to be sure, but right from the start, he's not the hero of this story. If anything, at the beginning, Malik is the one who should be championed for carrying out the task we could not, and at great personal loss. Over the course of the game, Altair will learn to question everything he sees, including our leader Al-Mualim, and his intelligence working to fit all the pieces together will hint at the true ending. We're given the opportunity to see the truth in what each of our targets have to say, and whether we choose to agree with their methods that often led them to the end of our blade, there's a little bit of truth in just about every one of them. We see in the Dr. Garnier evidence of brutal experiments being performed on so-called patients, but we hear from him a genuine concern for them when we kill him. He wants to know what will happen to his people. And if you walk around his hospital, you can actually see evidence of his success as some people thank him for his efforts. The Merchant King felt absolutely tragic to me, saying that he did what he did because he could not, in good conscience, support a god or a people that called him an abomination for how he was born. William speaks of good intentions, and to his credit, many of his results were positive, but the methods used to get them were wrong. The whole point of Assassin's Creed is that both the Templars and the Assassins wanted the same outcome, but disagreed on how to get there. It's easier as a younger audience member to simply believe in the Assassin's Creed, that if you give people the freedom to do better, that they will indeed do better. But then you get a bit older, and you deal with kids, and raise them, and you understand the need for order and structure that the Templars strive for. As with most things that involve political ideology, the truth is often found somewhere in the middle, and neither the extremes of the Assassins nor the Templars contain all the answers. Some of our targets speak to the lower parts of human nature, when we see Majadin killing people because he has the power to and because it was fun. It's a part of the human being that most of us don't identify with or even want to acknowledge, but we know that these people exist. Sometimes there isn't noble intentions led astray. Some people are just monsters. Or we see people like Sabrand. Some people are just scared. Fear is one of the greatest motivators of human behavior. He saw the people around him in his Brotherhood of Templars, men he probably thought to be untouchable, fall like dominoes, getting closer and closer to his place in line. When Sabrand became convinced through the apple that there was no god, it shattered his entire belief system. Imagine living your life on faith just to peer behind the curtain and find no heaven waiting for you. His fear of death is powerful and moving. The first title set a standard for storytelling that was just phenomenal, and it doesn't seem to exist in the games we see made now. It was there for a few years, sprinkled in. We see a great example of the conflict brewing between Amet and Ezio in Revelations, and it's kind of touched on in Black Flag, but for the most part, it's been lost. You would think that Origins would be, pardon the pun, the origins for these core ideals, but we barely even see it. We learn that canonically the Assassins were formed from the ashes of a revenge quest, and while there was the concept of order from, well, the Order, it wasn't the main plot device that drove the story, and therefore didn't really feel like any of it mattered. On some level, I'm willing to acknowledge the realities of how, over the course of the game and over generations, the battle evolved from the Order versus Freedom narrative to Assassins versus Templars, first seeing this change starting in AC3 and really becoming streamlined in Syndicate. Although I'm not willing to give Ubisoft credit for that being intentional, I would assume it's more of a happy accident. The funny thing is that while I think a lot of the games lack a core idea based around Assassin's Creed, sometimes they were willing to really push away from even attempting to make an AC-based title and wrote really solid stories or at least solid characters. Black Flag and Unity both come to mind, but I'd like to circle back to them in a little bit. Along with the basics found in the first title, there was a couple things that the Ezio trilogy added that I believe became core features of the game. The first being an interconnected story in the modern day that follows Desmond as he works to unlock knowledge needed in the current year. Now, the way Desmond's story ended in Assassin's Creed 3 was tragically bad, but before that in Revelations we finally saw him become a real character, and that was really nice. The big things that the Ezio trilogy added were social stealth and just phenomenal worlds to enjoy. Whether I enjoyed interacting with them or not, there's really no world in the mainline Assassin's Creed game that isn't well crafted, at least from a visual perspective. Social stealth is a massive gameplay addition that really went on to define the series, making it unique and allowing for some seriously fun gameplay. The idea of hiding in sight is something that's just so damn attractive because it feels just a little bit impossible. This was removed in Origins, and the series, in my opinion, just lost so much of what made Assassin's Creed in that title. But let's sum up where we're at. What is an Assassin's Creed game from my perspective? To me, Assassin's Creed starts with a strong narrative full of areas of opinion up for debate that allow the player to make their own interpretations and should, in theory, allow for both sides to make at least some valid arguments. From a gameplay perspective, I'm fine with either a slower, more methodical combat system like we found in AC1 with more technical features that allow better players to show off, or the rapid combat we saw in Brotherhood or Revelations, allowing players to be what Assassin Grandmasters really should be, leaps and bounds above their competition. But that being said, the gameplay should focus less on open combat as the best option and instead should just be an option. Something I think the first game excelled at making running as solid of an option as standing your ground both in terms of fun and difficulty. Free run mechanics should be an interesting and accessible thing. I think Revelations nailed this balance with the hook blade and parachute along with a very well designed city in Constantinople that allowed for great feeling movement. Along with the free run down option found in Unity and Syndicate along with chase breakers from the Kenway saga or just enterable buildings from later were all great additions. Stealth should be fun and rewarding, feeling like you really got ahead of your enemies when you pull off a kill. So where did it all go wrong? Well, as much as I absolutely hate to say it because of personal enjoyment levels of the games, Assassin's Creed 3, while terrible in almost every aspect, did in fact follow an Assassin's Creed story at its core, even if that story was terrible. And again, I hate to say it because I think all the problems started with how good Black Flag was. I love Black Flag as a game, and as a character, I really like how even though it was too late to make it relevant to the game, Edward Kenway felt like he really had a deep understanding of the Creed that many characters before or after him simply seemed to lack. Edward on his own was actually a great character, having a depth to him that they really took the whole game to show off and develop. Black Flag also had a fantastic cast. Every pirate in the game was a great character and had a surprising amount of development for the size of the ensemble. And it was the characters around Edward like Mary, Adewale, Anne, Thatch, and others that made his transition from pirate to assassin believable and, well, good. The game was absolutely at its worst when it was cosplaying as an Assassin's Creed title, and that's the biggest problem, but that being said, the game itself was great with an amazing world to explore, a fantastic cast of characters, fun combat, great soundtrack, and just overall fantastic experience, which I believe became the downfall for the series. For many people, Black Flag was their introduction to the Assassin's Creed franchise, and that became the expectation they had going forward. Along with setting a new standard for what Assassin's Creed was, the fact that the game sold so well meant that there was corporate pressure to make the next game less like what I fell in love with, and more like what Black Flag was, an open-world adventure that lacked any parts of the moral grayness or introspection found in previous titles. Do I have a problem with Black Flag? No, absolutely not. I love the game, in fact, it's one of my favorites. And for what it's worth, they clearly got very good writers who did their best to work together a swashbuckling pirate adventure with an Assassin's Creed tie-in, and I think on a lot of levels, they succeeded. The writers certainly did a better job mixing the two worlds together than the level designers and gameplay sections of the studios did. Randomly being forced to ghost through an area or doing tailing mission after tailing mission were the worst parts of the title, and frankly, without the constraints of the IP, Black Flag could have been in the running for hands down best game ever contention. Don't get me wrong, it probably wouldn't have cracked the top 20 best games of all time once it had, all the noise from launch had settled down, but it was a name away from the chance at attempting all-time greatness. From Black Flag, things more or less traveled downhill. Rogue had a lot of interesting ideas and was more focused on the Assassins versus Templars, but it was poorly written and lacked any real impact on the concepts the series was known for. I love the gameplay in Rogue, it might be my favorite in the series, but from a narrative standpoint, it fell down. Then we step into Unity, which is a very interesting case because while it masquerades as a game based around the differences between Templars and Assassins, it really has nothing to do with either. Unity is a love story set in a universe with Assassins and Templars who become nothing more than a device to serve the plot, acting as an invisible barrier between Arno and Elise, albeit one that is often hopped over. The tragedy of Arno Dorian can honestly be pretty easily tracked back to the Assassins, and honestly, I struggle to believe he dedicated his life to them after never really caring about the ideals of the Order, but that's a separate issue. The point is that Unity is yet another narrative restrained by the IP it is part of, not enhanced by it. Now, don't get me wrong, Unity has different problems. The launch mostly, but I would argue it's probably the most assassin-like Assassin's Creed gameplay found since the first game, with elaborate assassination investigations that test your skill in a level which is very fun. That being said, Unity started its own unique problem. It was the beginning of difficulty being tied to gear, and that is its own bag of worms. All games following Unity would have difficulty tied to imaginary numbers that lacked any real basis in logic, and that's a damn shame because frankly, Unity's combat system could have been peak Assassin's Creed. Moving on to Syndicate, we got a game that just seemed to be all over the place. Losing pretty much all moral ambiguity in the villain, having very fun assassination missions but clearly leaning more heavily into combat than previous titles, at least outside of Black Flag, and we not only had gear-based but level-based difficulty. We see in a lot of ways these same problems in Origins, which is when they essentially announced they had no intentions of making Assassin's Creed games anymore and would stop the moment they were allowed to do so. My video on it dropped last week if you want my more detailed opinion, but the short version is that that game is a massive departure from Assassin's Creed as it had become defined. Origins would go on to establish the Ubisoft template for what we'd see in almost all their open world games today. Sometimes better, sometimes worse, but for the most part, it's a massive world that encourages, if not outright requires, grinding of side quests that the majority of the time have about 5% more love and care than a Bethesda Radiant quest. There are people that don't really care about a strong narrative and are just happy to plod along in a world aimlessly doing dull quest after dull quest, but I am not among these people, and that is in no way what made me a fan of Assassin's Creed. I maintain that Origins is a great example for people that love the genre of massive, pretty, grindy games that excel at nothing but at consuming your time. However, they could have called those games anything other than Assassin's Creed and they would have been infinitely better for it. I'm sorry, but the moment I stab someone from behind with a hidden blade and they don't die, I'm declaring it to be from anything other than the Assassin's Creed universe. I don't know where you find the logic that being a better fighter means you're able to survive having several inches of steel driven into your neck, but it isn't in any universe I would want to be walking around trying to assassinate people. It's counterintuitive to the core gameplay fundamentals of Assassin's Creed, and I won't stand for it. So that's where they screwed up. They made a different game with Assassin's Creed on the box, and it spiraled out of control from there. But now we have Mirage coming out with the chance of righting the ship and bringing us back to basics. Will they actually do that? I have no idea. And for this next section, you should be aware that I have intentionally cut myself off from any knowledge about Mirage, as I do with any game I'm interested in. All I know is that there's a new protagonist named Basim in Baghdad, and they have promised to bring a more traditional Assassin's Creed experience. So if I share any thoughts that devs have discussed in trailers or interviews, just be aware that I haven't consumed any of that. That being said, what I do need to see over my playthrough of Assassin's Creed Mirage to get me to return to the series is this. First of all, I need to be able to play the game. No level-based difficulty, no gear-based progression, nothing that keeps me away from playing the game the way I want to play it at any given time. People who want to grind side quests will do it whether or not it's necessary. Hell, if you followed my channel since the beginning, which I know basically none of you have, but if you had, you'd know I love side content and often find my favorite parts of a game in it. But this only happens because I want to be doing the side content. Because I want to go out of my way to experience awesome stories or gameplay pieces you've built for me, not because I need some number by my name just to play the rest of the game. Next up, I need the gameplay to feel like Assassin's Creed. I need social stealth. I need a game focused on movement, not combat. No more grappling hooks. No needing a horse to get around town. I want a solid parkour system that encourages me to take to the rooftops and learn the fastest and coolest ways to get around. I want social stealth back. I can hide behind a wall in plenty of games, and that's not unique to Assassin's Creed or done better by Assassin's Creed. Just give me a map with crowds and let me get to my target before disappearing like a shadow in the crowd. Speaking of moving like a shadow, there should never be any reason a connection with the hidden blade isn't a kill. No reason whatsoever. If at all possible, I don't want skill trees or leveling of any kind. Just let me unlock an amazing toolkit and allow me to explore carefully crafted levels. A strong narrative and well-crafted main character along with supporting cast would honestly be a bonus for me. Yes, I'm a very narrative-focused gamer, but I just don't have high hopes for any writing team at Ubisoft, and while I would love to see a narrative with all the strengths of previous titles, I would be accepting of one that just isn't as bad as what we've been getting for near a decade now. Do I think that Mirage is going to be the cure-all for my issues with the Assassin's Creed franchise? No, of course not. I'm hopeful, not insane, but that being said, for me, this is do or die. Ubisoft have killed off just about every franchise I grew up with, and it's been years since I've been able to play a new Assassin's Creed title. If they fumble this, I guess I'm just gonna have to give up full stop. But that's not a happy thought. So instead, let's wait to see what Mirage really is before we render any judgments on it, and instead give out some awards. Now I should clarify, I often try to back my opinions that I share on this channel with at least as much a base of a fact as I can, but today I'm just gonna cut loose, have some fun, and share my opinions with this one, so try not to take it too seriously. I'd love to hear what would have won in these categories for you guys, but I don't give a damn about your opinion on my opinion. Alright, let's start off with a fun one. Best parkour! Or free running. I don't really know the difference. Now, this is a tough one for me, and I think the answer will surprise you, but I'm tipping my hat on this one to Syndicate. I know, all of you Unity fans are going insane right now, but for me, that game just felt way too damn slow, and it was too inconsistent to really enjoy. The only reason you don't know Syndicate had the best free running system is that the grappling hook let you skip it far too often. Next up, let's look at some aesthetics. We're going to talk about the best default uniform in the game. The winner is, of course, Ezio, no one comes close, but the question is AC2 or Brotherhood. It's very, very close between the two of them, and I can make an argument for both, but I'm going to go with my knee-jerk reaction and say Brotherhood. It just has something to it that just slightly pushes it over the edge to me. Can't quite explain it. Alright, best swordplay. This isn't best overall combat, it's just pure swordplay. You're probably going to hate this answer, but I'm giving it to Altair in the original. I just love it. I can't quite fathom why. That being said, best overall combat goes to Black Flag, no questions. Revelations was amazing, but nothing has or will ever clear dropping onto the deck of a ship and wading in, steel in both hands, along with 4 pistols to help clear the decks. It just doesn't get better than that. In the same vein, we have the best toolkit. This one has to go to Rogue. The Kenway Saga already had a fantastic array of weapons to be used, and the air rifle rounded it out in ways I never could have expected it to. Absolutely loved it, especially paired with Stalkers. Alright, fun little one here, but best title screen. This entry was inspired by Syndicate, and that's who I'm going to give it to. I don't know what else to say, I just love it. Alright, now, best side content. Man, this one was tricky because Black Flag is an obvious top contender, and in some ways so is Unity. That being said, I don't know, Brotherhood and Revelations are both way up there for me, but you know what, I'm gonna have to say Brotherhood. Sue me, I like Borgia Towers, and the Layers of Romulus were fantastic. Yeah, it's a tight race, but I'm giving it the nod. Okay, let's get some dishonorable mentions in before we finish so we can end on a positive note. Starting with the worst character. For the record, the Fry twins are very high on my list here, but I don't personally dislike them, so I'm gonna have to say Connor. That guy absolutely sucks, and I wish Hatham had pulled out so we could have made the game about him instead. Would have been way better. Next up, worst story is also an interesting problem because I think I could make a real argument for Origins here, but I think that mostly lies in how much I had to do outside the story just to play it, and the fact that Bayek's voice actor couldn't cut it for me. Assassin's Creed 3 is also up there, honestly, for the modern day segments alone, just borderline Last Jedi levels of disaster. But Connor's story was just mid with a terrible lead. I have to give it to Rogue. It felt lazy, rushed, and nonsensical. They didn't make a strong viewpoint for the Templars, and it really fell flat because of it. For that alone, I've got to hand this award to Assassin's Creed Rogue with Shay Cormac. Although I like Shay. Sometimes. Next up, we have the worst city. Now, for this one, I really should have said worst world, but sometimes those are synonymous in Assassin's Creed. For me, though, it's clearly AC3. Absolutely no part of it is enjoyable to get around or interact with outside of the cool social stealth things you can do. Alright, the last of the worst is the one I would never play again. Now, I'm sure you're expecting me to say Assassin's Creed 3, and honestly, when this video renders, I'll be overjoyed to uninstall it. But, if I had to do this whole project again and got to skip one of them without a doubt, it would be Origins. 5 times the length of the other titles with, for me, basically no redeeming features. Just a boring slog through a boring world with a boring story that failed to grab me on any level. Alright, now back to the best of the best as we can name our favorite city. This is extremely close for me yet again. I absolutely love both exploring and looking at the city of Venice. And the seas found in Black Flag are mesmerizing. There's something that feels so right about London even if I can't quite put my finger on it, but for my money, Constantinople is my winner. I just loved getting around it. I think it looked great. Just all around, everything included, I adored my time in that city. Next up, I have the one that I get lost in. And for me, that's clearly Black Flag. No reason to beat around the bush. Hours pass by just sailing around, taking prizes, and listening to shanties. It was, for me, an all-timer in terms of just melting into the world. Only all-time favorites of mine like Cyberpunk and Total War Shogun 2 are easier for me to lose track of time in. Now, on a similar but different note would be the one I hated leaving the most, and that has to go to Assassin's Creed Revelations. Something about how perfect it all was really just didn't make me want to let it go. I loved doing the edit anytime I needed an extra 30 seconds of footage because it meant I could spend a couple hours just enjoying it. Alright, next up we have the best overall cast. Not the main character, but those around them, and this has to go to Black Flag. Everyone Edward spent time with left some kind of impact on him or the player. My heart ached for each friend in that game that we lost, and it was simply just something that was better done than any of the other titles. Now, the best character is tough, but it's not the closest for me. I love the one real tragedy we find in Arno, who seemed to have his whole world slip through his fingers to no fault of his own. I think Edward's intelligence, charisma, and flaws mixed together to make an all-timer. But that being said, Actually, no. I was gonna give it to Altair, but no, I am gonna give it to Edward. He was fantastic, and the more I think about it, the more I like him. Yeah, no, has to go to Edward. He was just fantastic. I love Altair, and I've spoken over and over again, but I think that has a lot to do with how he interacted with the people around him. And I think Edward was just he was phenomenal. Next up is best story, and I will absolutely give that one to Altair and the original Assassin's Creed. I've beat these points to death over multiple videos, but there simply isn't a better narrative in this series than the hunt for the Nine and what followed. Now, I have two categories left. The last will be the best Assassin's Creed game, but just before that, I want to name the best game that has Assassin's Creed in the title, and to the surprise of no one, it's Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. It falls down gameplay-wise and mostly ignores the story title-wise, but as a complete package and viewed without the expectations laid out previously, it has to be said it's the best in the series. Alright, we're getting a last-minute submission from the editor here, who's also me, if anyone's confused by that. I want to add one more category in of the single most badass moment in this game. Because, well, I just want one more opportunity to show off this.
Elise,
We don't have much time. Where is Germain?
I will never talk.
Then right.
I mean, come on. Alright, back to the video. Last but not least, it's the best Assassin's Creed game. The one that puts it all together, and for me, without a doubt, that is Revelations. The story wasn't as nuanced as the original, but that being said, they managed to balance three main characters, and even with vastly different exposure to them, made them all feel equally fleshed out and important to the story. The city was just a joy to explore, and I enjoyed just getting around town. Something that was rarely true in the series. The hook blade made both combat and movement more interesting, and is one of the best things that never saw the light of day more than once. I loved Revelations from start to finish, cover to cover, and I would happily recommend it to anybody. Well, that's it. All we can do now is wait and see what becomes of Mirage. I really hope it's good, but I'm not going to stick all my eggs in that basket. Regardless of which way it goes after that review, I'll be taking a long break from Assassin's Creed, both in my own time and on this channel. You should see the Phantom Liberty review sometime after it comes out. I'll try to be punctual, but I don't get review copies yet, and I really want to take my time to enjoy it. That being said, thank you to everyone who has followed along this journey with me. I hope you've had fun, and I hope you're excited for some more diverse content coming up. With that being said, this is Purple signing off. Have a wonderful night, and always remember to smile. Thanks, guys.
Oh, all the comrades that e'er I had, they're sorry for my going away, and all the sweethearts that e'er I've loved, they'd wish me one more day.